I know Tyler. I say I know Tyler so well. He died, and I had no idea. So take that for what it's worth. But the
Yeah.
Tyler I thought I knew, his answer would be simply this: Dad, his mother died.
Yeah.
That's why he's hurting. I don't have a reason. I'm the starting quarterback. I have a family that loves me. My mom and dad are alive. I have no physical injuries. I love my team and my coaches. What do I have to be sorry about? So if you take that back to your example and say physical injuries and mental health injuries, that is stigma on steroids, right? This is a young man that thinks he's not worthy of getting help because he doesn't have an injury big enough to do. But yet cancer,
Yes.
we will treat cancer, and it should be the same way, right?
Mark, thanks so much for being here on the Secrets to Winning. And this podcast today is not so much about winning as it is to sometimes dealing with the pressures of winning. And you guys, you and your family have done something that no family should ever have to do, but it has led you to where you are today and hopefully saving lives in doing that. Thank you for being here, and thank you for continuing to inspire and to be there for people who maybe don't have a voice or need a voice to pull them, to shine a light for them, and to educate the coaches and the leaders that we have in our country about mental health and suicide. So thank you for being here.
Well, thank you, Brett. It's not lost on us that awareness and stigma reduction requires that we tell a version of this story publicly. And if we don't get covered and we don't get the option to talk to student athletes and coaches and staffs, then we don't get the message out. So it's a partnership in that way. And so we're grateful to be on today to talk to you about that.
Your life and your family dramatically changed in January of 2018 when your son Tyler took his own life. There were no signs or symptoms at Washington State, and if you want to learn more, go to their website, Hilinskis Hope, and I'll give all that information in the intro and the outro. But it's truly remarkable having heard you speak at the Big Sky Conference, having known your story, known what you do. As a parent, it makes me just it makes it, I mean it rattles me to the core.
Well, and I apologize for that, but it is
No,
part of
don't
this.
apologize.
No. We seem to apologize a lot since Tyler passed, um, and it's just a reflexive thing. But no, really, one of the things we have to be careful about is triggering other people, right? We talk about these stories, and it's much more complicated and detailed, and there's much more science behind the stuff that's going on. And one of the things Kym and I wanted to be sure of is when we went out and talked about Tyler and told his story, that we were doing more good, and be careful about that. but you're exactly right. It touches people differently. I think we have to be as candid and transparent as possible. And if we can speak from that platform, because Tyler doesn't have it, it's really us, right? We hear from so many pro athletes and collegiate athletes, even high school athletes, that talk about their struggles, or their attempted suicides in some cases, but their mental illnesses that they're struggling with. And they're able to tell that story. Tyler isn't here to tell us what happened. And so it's really been on us the last 3 years is to take everybody on Hilinskis Hope, on this journey of trying to figure out maybe what happened and how we can use some of that information to help others.
I have people who listen to me and follow me know that I have been sounding the trumpets for about 5 years now about the emerging mental health burden that we have in today's society. Um, that was pre-COVID. With COVID, it's just magnified. I think some of it is that we're turning the light on some areas where people have been suffering independently for a long time. I think some of it is also that we hold standards to our youth, to our performers, to our people in our world that is almost unrealistic. And as a result, we lack, I'm going to say this the wrong way, but many times we lack the coping mechanisms
Mhm.
in the moment to deal with the stresses that we're facing right now. It seems like it's just avalanching us. I am terrified of where we're going with our current system to not really help. I mean, I'm so proud that we have more people in the college settings, but it's still not enough.
That's right. No, that's right. I think that right after Tyler died, in our little world at WSU, we had we had one half of one FTE to cover 565 collegiate student athletes, right? So that's a mathematical problem that's never gonna you're never gonna win.
Mm-mm.
And so we thought about that, and we thought, well, with this platform, is there something that we can do to help those schools that don't have the resources? And as we moved to the SEC, we're over here in South Carolina now, and Ryan's up at Northwestern, so we're sort of all over the place. But when we came out here, what we realized is not every school has a resource problem. And so we're grateful for that, right? But you sort of nailed it. Until we start educating and talking about mental illnesses the same way we talk about physical injuries and
Yeah.
disabilities and illnesses, we got to start much younger, or we're going to be putting out fires in high school and college.
It's we can go on to this later, but I don't understand why we're not starting in kindergarten teaching kids mindfulness and conflict resolution. I would love to find a foundation to get behind that, where every day we're teaching our kids something. It's better than throwing a movie on and watching Free Willy. Um,
Well,
but
I do have an answer to that, actually, Brett.
okay.
So one of the guys we work with wrote a book called Behind Happy Faces. His name's Ross
Mm,
Zabo, and Ross created a curriculum for our youth. He has it down at UCLA. He's in the Geffen school there for sixth grade to eighth grade, and he has an elementary school. And part of their curriculum is mental health once a week. And so it's a
mm.
mandatory class. And so I don't know if that's the only model or the right model or whatever, but the British have adopted it. And I think that's exactly right. And you're great to blow the horn on. We got to start talking about this stuff sooner to make it. You shouldn't have to be courageous to talk about things that
No.
are bothering you, right? That's the point.
Yep. Well, so I was very fortunate. My mom was very open to mental health needs when I was growing up. And she would be in therapy, and she had a very rough childhood, and suffered from depression and anxiety, and still at times does. And so, but she can remember. She'll tell the story that when I was 2 years old, my dad was flying in the Air Force. We were in Homestead, Florida, and she said I was so depressed, and all of a sudden it came over my mind that I'm going to commit suicide.
Oh,
And she said it was the greatest peace I'd ever felt in my life. And she said that scared me because the pain that I was in a great marriage. I was with a wonderful husband, and yet I suffered.
mm,
And she said, on that day, I went into therapy. And she said, I've been in therapy ever since. And so in my household, talking about mental health issues was normal.
mm,
I remember having a speaker come and speak to us. So when I was when my dad retired from the Air Force, I was in sixth grade, and we moved to a town called Plano, Texas.
mm.
I say a little town like joking.
Yeah.
It was the teenage suicide capital of the world in the 80s. And my third day of school, a kid in the seventh grade committed suicide.
Oh my goodness.
And the pressure and the values were so intense there. And it became a heroin capital. It was wealth beyond wealth type of stuff. And we weren't wealthy,
Understand.
but it was just a good subdivision. And so I remember when I was a freshman in high school, we moved to Baton Rouge. I went to an all boys Catholic school, and a gentleman came in to speak to us about suicide. I couldn't get the thought out of my head.
Mm,
And so I came home, called my parents, and said, this gentleman was talking about suicide, and I just cannot get the thought out of my head. Um, and it bothered me that I was having those thoughts. And so the next day I was in with a psychologist, and I'm very fortunate because I've stand on this platform because, you know, my mom was not afraid to say, hey, we're going to address this. And I remember I worked in the pharmaceutical industry on a psychiatric drug for 8 years,
oh, yeah.
and we were doing education. I remember standing in the line at a grocery store, Mark, and I look over, and I'm from Louisiana, and so you see Britney Spears, a Louisiana girl there.
Hmm.
She's got her head shaven. She's obviously having some issues, and all the tabloids are panning her.
Yeah.
They're making fun of her. They're marginalizing her. And on the exact same picture, on the next tabloid, there was a cover of a gentleman who was on Grey's Anatomy. And I'm not knocking skin cancer, okay?
Understand.
So please understand what I'm saying. But it was my cancer story. And it was a loving tribute on the cover of People magazine. And I looked at those two, and I was so angry because here's a girl who's suffering, and here's a guy who's suffering. But look at the dichotomy of how we treat them. And I was very fortunate that I was able to have those conversations. But we need to help our performers. I tell people all the time, and I don't mean to be jumping on your podcast and doing this,
No, you're
but
good.
it fires me up because people listening to this, and Mark will tell you this, your success on or off the field, in the coaching ranks, in business, is not a preventer of mental health struggles. The number of people who come to me and say, I have been suffering and I've been treated, and that's why I wanted you on this call.
Yeah.
This is what I wanted to talk about, is somebody to listen to this and say, I'm going to make a phone call. I'm going to call my doctor right now.
There's a lot to unpack there, because that's really, you understand some of the issues really well, I think. But if I could, maybe I could take that and elaborate on part of Tyler's story, because
Please do.
I think it makes a ton of sense here. So if you've heard of Tyler talk, I change the stories a lot just to, based on the audience, or who, what we've been through that day. But one of them I share with the kids and the staff is Tyler's roommate. He had two roommates, but his primary roommate, CJ Dimry, was a receiver on the team. His Tyler's best friend, his roommate, so forth. I tell the story that after Tyler died, CJ told us that Tyler used to take him to his own psychotherapy classes every other week, every on Friday. And so Tyler would drive, because CJ didn't have a car, is really probably part of it. So Tyler drove him, dropped him off, would go get some food, come back, wait for him in the parking lot. They'd sit in the car and eat it afterwards. And he would talk about his appointment. CJ's mom died from cancer when he was very little, and he's been open about that and talking about it. And so, I used to say a couple years ago, I used to say that there's a guy that Tyler loves, that he respects, that he would do anything for, knows that he's suffering, knows where the counselor is, goes to the appointment and feels better about it and talks to me. And I would say, over and over in my sleep, why didn't Tyler ask him? Hey, I think I need to talk to somebody. And I think it comes down to this, and this rolls into your example. I know Tyler. I say I know Tyler so well. He died, and I had no idea. So take that for what it's worth. But the
Yeah.
Tyler I thought I knew, his answer would be simply this: Dad, his mother died.
Yeah.
That's why he's hurting. I don't have a reason. I'm the starting quarterback. I have a family that loves me. My mom and dad are alive. I have no physical injuries. I love my team and my coaches. What do I have to be sorry about? So if you take that back to your example and say, physical injuries and mental health injuries, that is stigma on steroids, right? This is a young man that thinks he's not worthy of getting help because he doesn't have an injury big enough to do. But yet cancer,
Yes.
we will treat cancer, and it should be the same way, right? Britney
Yeah.
Spears should be, in your example, Britney Spears, the cover should be, we need to help our youth. They're our entertainment. I don't care how much money they make. I tune on the TV every weekend, and I look at sports, and I watch collegiate kids and high school kids and professional athletes, and that's our entertainment. And the minute they sacrifice, we think it's so tough, to play with busted arms and big bruises and stuff. And there's a certain amount of that. There's grit, and you have to be tough. I'm not taking a single thing away. But if you're having thoughts of hurting yourself or somebody else, or you can't crawl out of bed for one last practice, you need to be able to say, I think I might be broken on something, and it shouldn't be any different than my ACL feels really loose, guys. Can somebody take a look at that? And we're not there yet. And I think we're going to try to make some impact into that area. But I think that was a really good example in this world, how we think of mental health and how we think of physical health.
Yeah. It's funny, right? We, if you called in and said, I have to take a mental health day, people's like, oh, you're overwhelmed.
Yeah, right. You're weak.
You're weak.
Mm-hmm.
And I've shared with people on this podcast, I've suffered from anxiety my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And at times I'd get depressed and I'd figure out how to work through it. But my
Mm-hmm.
anxiety is legit, panic attacks, GAD, I mean, you name it.
Sure.
Probably helps me from a therapeutic perspective because I'm so engaged on my people.
Yeah.
And so, there's some of that's there, but there are some days I wake up and I don't know why I feel like I've got a
Mm-hmm.
bunny running 5,000 miles in my head and in my stomach. I can't place it. And what I've learned to do is not look for the place as to why, but more embrace the feel.
Yeah.
And and I've had to go on my own journey for the last 7 or 8 years to understand it. And my youngest daughter is very much like me. And we've embraced it from the very beginning, and let her know it's okay. My wife she'll laugh. She'll say, I'm the person who puts things in a box at the top of the closet and I leave it there mentally.
Yeah.
And my youngest is like that too. And it's like, okay, that's fine. Sometimes the box falls on you
Yeah.
and you got to be prepared for that. But everybody has their own psychological fingerprint. And what I want players, coaches, and families to understand is that there is variation there. There is a continuum. There is all that. It doesn't scream, a kid who's suffering does not show up all day wearing black and wearing, and falling asleep all day in class. Sometimes they're suffering,
Yeah.
they're functionally suffering, or feasibly suffering, meaning that they're sitting there and they're looking good, they're doing everything right, and underneath it's just hurting.
Well,
It
Doc,
just hurts.
let me tell you. So, to go further into the story, um, and you're right. Your description of your own struggles with anxiety is how we should be able to talk about that, right? It's nothing different than any of the physical injuries
Yeah.
or illnesses. So I'm thinking back to when Tyler was 11 or 12, and he was always I shouldn't say always. After he was 8 or 9, he was the quarterback on his youth teams, and as such, and he was a good athlete on good teams that were winning a lot. So when he would go to practice, he was sort of, everybody came to him. They started their drills. He was the captain, all that stuff. And a couple times at practice, we drive him to practice. He would sit in the car and he would ask us to drive in a circle around the practice field, go up and down the street a couple times. And Kym and I both experienced it together and separately when we dropped him off. And we would talk to him and we would love him, and we would say, what is it? And he goes, do you mind? So anyway, so we go through this routine, calming him down. At one point, his coach had to come out to the car and talk to him. Now, I have no experience with mental health, nor does Kym. We think it's a kid there's no reason for it, right? That we understand.
Yep.
And he didn't say, obviously at 11 or 12, he didn't know what was going on. But shame on us well, not shame on us. We
Yeah.
tried to love him better. But today, so people say all the time, what did you learn? Well, I can tell you right now, if I had a 12-year-old that wouldn't get out of the car when he's the guy, he's not afraid of anybody. He's not, he's been there. So this would be 80th practice, that kind of thing. What's going on? I would find out. I wouldn't let it. So at a very young age, he figured out, because this dissipated, Doc. This in high school, we never saw those things. But I think he got really good at just internalizing it to the point where it's easier to leave the planet than to get this, one more time and try to wrestle this dragon to the ground. And there's so much, in that. Obviously, for us personally, it's the end of our way of living as we know it. And if you only knew Tyler, we say this all the time, if you only knew him, he's that kid on all those teams. So we've got hundreds of thousands of young people, a smaller percentage of those that might be going and suffering through those. And if any part of our story can reach a conversation, and people will start that sooner, make our youth feel better about asking for help, or just conversationally, this is how I'm feeling. Isn't that how everybody else feels? It's not, but you know what? We're very good at treating this stuff. Let's go talk to somebody. And Kym and I, we've done a lot of things. One of the things we've changed, we don't say committed suicide anymore. And the reason we don't say committed is because we think at 21, certainly 12, oh gosh, we just talked to somebody who had a 10-year-old die by suicide. This wasn't an informed act. They didn't go and say, I've 21 years is pretty good. Everything went well. I don't think I need to be here anymore. And, you can make examples for 50, 60, 70-year-old people who have been through life. At 21, at anything between 15 or 10 and 25, I just completely disagree. Suicide is not an answer to anything, right?
Correct.
To zero. So being able to talk about this stuff is going to save lives. But as importantly, the ones that, what was Tyler going through the 3-4 weeks before, days before, hours before? What a miserable life, right? What a miserable life that must be. So those that have depression, anxiety, bipolar symptoms, schizophrenia, they're having a rough time as it is. So if we can reach them, not all of them are going to attempt suicide, have suicidal ideation or anything, but we want that whole process of dealing with mental health mental illness in particular, elevated to the same platform as our physical health. And I think that's a worthy cause.
we, our listeners, we're talking to Mark Hilinski of hilinskishope.org. Make sure you check them out. If this conversation is triggering any thoughts of you or anybody that any thoughts of overwhelming or even anxiety of I can't believe I'm having these thoughts and I'm scared. There's some great resources out there available. One of them is the suicide prevention hotline, and National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. It's 1-800-273-TALK, and that's 8255. It's interesting little backstory. The first suicide hotline started at LSU.
Is that
Um,
right? I didn't know
and
that.
it started there where I went to college because a student government president died by suicide.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was so they started a helpline there. And if you're having thoughts of suicide, you're not weak. You're having thoughts of suicide, you're not broken. A lot of people with anxiety have thoughts, and we may have passing thoughts. I saw a study years ago, and I cannot find it again. And
Mm.
so I say this from a bastardized stance. They did a study looking at the NIH, did a study looking at adolescent girls through middle school and high school. And I want to say 75% had suicidal ideation
Mm.
during that time. Now, it didn't reach intention, it didn't reach plan, which
Mm.
for people who are listening, there's thoughts,
Yeah.
there's intention, and then there's a plan, and that's levels of severity. But we may sometimes have these passing thoughts of, I'd be better off dead. And that doesn't mean that you are actively considering suicide, but sometimes it's easier if I'm not here, don't have to face this test, I'm in trouble, don't have to go take care of that, I'm whatever. And then it progresses. And so there's a lot of different mental health struggles that people struggle with. Panic disorder is one of the most common, to have acts and thoughts of suicide because the pain and it is so debilitating. And so if you're having those thoughts, please reach out to even your primary care physician, but talk to somebody. Do not suffer in silence. It would, there are people there. And even if we don't know what to say, if you know somebody in your life who is suffering, you don't have to say the right thing, just say something. You're not going to induce it by talking to them. You're not, you can't put it in their mind. Sometimes just talking to them can allow for some, the urgency or the impulsiveness
Mm.
to wane a little bit. And so please, this is a conversation that needs to be had. 100%.
100%.
Do you think this was, in a way, there's a gift here from Tyler to continue the message?
Kim and I struggle with, being excited about things, and we catch ourselves all the time. And I think we're able to sort of separate them a little bit. There's whatever positivity comes out of this will never sort of achieve the loss. This is a zero sum problem
Yeah.
where so separating those two things, I think the gift, as you put it, is and you get in my mind for a second. I'm trying to do everything every day so that if Tyler had come across us and seen a Tyler talk or a Billy talk or a Susie talk, or one of his friends did, or the family, if there's a way to get that awareness and that stigma reduction far enough, then there's going to be Tylers that are impacted by it one way or another, and that's what drives us. So I think it's tough. It's tough because I can be honest with you. We've talked to those guys, that have
Mm.
either attempted and failed, or have crippling mental illness, and we hang up the phone and we understand to the extent we can, right? Right. I mean, we don't unless you have it, how difficult their lives are every day, but we still think it's better than not being here, right? That there's
Yeah.
hope for a better. So I think we're trying to take the light that went out when Tyler died. If you're his parents, is too hard to replace, and that's disappointing for everybody. So in a small way, I think us being able to talk about this, bring resources to campus, educate our youth, start sooner and sooner. I think that's a decent. That's the best we've got.
Yeah. How do you win the day? How do you win every day?
I It's a great question. I think the way we sort of think about winning anymore, is super basic. Um, that we're all near each other. We stay in touch, whether it's together in the same room, same house, same zip code. same country, and we stay in touch that way. So that's incredibly important, and not that very different than it was before, right? I mean,
Yeah.
this is the same thing. A little more urgency to it, a little more, checking each other out and so forth. And when you kind of go to bed that night, if you feel like you've accomplished, you try to accomplish that early, right? The connection part, and again, that sounds like a big plan. It's nothing more than a feeling, and if you can accomplish that during the day, and you've worked hard enough, um, with what you have left, and not, I don't, I say it that way because not everybody wants to do this or can do this, and nobody chose this path. So if you do everything
Yeah.
you can that day, um, to further the love that's lost by Tyler being gone, I think you have to be okay with that. And to us, being okay doesn't sound like winning, but you got to start somewhere. And I think that's the path we're on today.
Yeah. I can't even imagine. I mean, I, the work that y'all have done has saved lives. I mean, I've watched it happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've watched college football players talk because they're allowed to now.
Well, it's let's talk about Alabama football for a second.
Yeah.
We we're football fans, right? We sometimes get picked on, and people think that we're only out for football players' mental health, and that I can understand that. And I'm not mad about that, but we work really hard to be super inclusive of all student athletes, and we only kind of loosely keep that focus because that's what we know, and that's what our kids know. Three quarterbacks, all football players, and one of the most amazing pieces on this journey, and you've heard this before, Doc, but um, out here in South Carolina, they started raising three fingers at the beginning of the third
Hmm.
quarter in football games. And so, it's Kym says it better: 10 seconds of the loudest silence, um, you've ever heard. And we were at Martin Stadium, here in South Carolina. Uh, Visiting team was Alabama, and we knew this was coming. We didn't know what to expect. It was the first time we ever did it. They played a PSA at halftime and so forth. And where we sit, where the players' parents sit, is behind the visitor bench, right? So just trying to paint a little picture. So as this thing comes along and the kickoff happens, the whistle after the ball's dead, between that point and the hike, or the kids coming up to the line, that's when this happens. So it gets very quiet. You sort of peripherally see a bunch of threes going up in the air, but I was facing right down on the sideline, sort of lost in thought, and I saw Coach Saban, first guy on the sideline with his fingers up. And I don't know what else to say other than it felt extremely powerful at that moment. Will and his staff were great, and so, but to see that reminds me that our kids look up to our leaders, to their coaches, to their staffs. It's a family. Sometimes it's dysfunctional, sometimes it's humming
It's
right
okay.
along, but it's a family, and that probably, that day, the whole thing, but
Yeah.
that resonated as much with me. And we tell that story all the time because I don't think, I think you can. And if our best guys can do it, if you can balance winning and the future of these kids' lives and their happiness and their, if you can do that, and the best guys can do that, then everybody can do it, right? And that just brought the conversation for me up to a whole nother level. That this doesn't have to be for all the rest of us. That if Alabama and Clemson and some of the better football teams the last couple of years embrace it, then hey guys, everybody else can do it too. You're not going to lose any advantage by, you're not going to be soft, you're not going to be weaker. These are firehouse teams, and guess what, they care about each other.
Yeah.
The young, our youth, would you agree, our young people are so encouraging. There's
Yes.
so much to look forward to, so we get energy from them, and um, we're grateful to be able to do it, to be honest.
You bring up Alabama football, where I'm fortunate enough to work, and we're led by a couple of very brilliant leaders in the mental health side over there. Dr. Ginger Gilmore Childress is a trailblazer.
Yeah.
You've known Ginger for a long time, and she is absolutely incredible. Jeff Allen is out of this world. Greg Byrne, the athletic director, is just different level.
Nice.
And Coach Saban. And, when Coach was at LSU, I was gone by that point. I'd been done playing ball, but my coach was his athletic director.
Okay.
And my coach had a daughter who was my mentor, who was a psychologist, who passed away due to stomach cancer.
Oh,
It was one of the most amazing human beings I've ever been around. She was my mentor.
yeah.
His other daughter was a social worker, and he was very involved in performance psychology, but psychology in the
Mm,
brain in general. So
yeah.
we didn't have a lot of consultants in our program because he consumed every book there was
Okay.
on it. But Coach Saban had a player when he was at LSU who was a starting center who died by suicide and drove down to the levee. And so I think it really, before that, woke it up because the gentleman who's such an influence in Coach's life, Dr. Rosen,
Mm,
who is a psychiatrist who's very, mental health issues within our program, mental health opportunities, mental health discussions, they're all on the table. We talk about it. We don't marginalize. And I'll tell you, Mark, when I got asked to come in to work with Alabama, it was every sport but football.
mm,
Because football, we have our own stuff. I was like,
yeah.
it's good. Went to LSU. It's all good.
Understand.
Seriously, not a big deal. Okay. And I got around Ginger and Jeff Allen, and then it was a year or two later, help this kid out, help this guy out. Hey, you got some expertise in some other areas. Coach doesn't know anything about it, type of thing. It was kind of funny.
Yeah.
And then it morphed into being much more involved. But there was a moment that hit me that I realized I was home.
Mm,
And we had a young kid who was a very big, powerful player.
yeah.
Okay. He was a 5-star. He was big time. He was not yet broken into the starting lineup, but he was coming.
Okay.
And he suffered greatly. And he suffered from really strong depression
Mm,
and really strong suicidality. And I remember I get a call. I'm over there, like, we need you to see this young man. Fine, I did. And I was like, look, I can't play this weekend. And I thought, that's it. I just made the call that's going to tick everyone else upstairs.
mm,
And I could still get chills thinking about it today. I get a call back that says, please tell him that we're going to get him the help he needs, that he's not going to have any reduction on his playing time
mm.
or his place on the roster when he returns healthy. All we care about is he being healthy. Okay. This wasn't, and I'm not saying this the wrong way, this wasn't the guy who wasn't going to play.
Right.
I want you to understand this listening to this.
Yeah.
This was a young man who had a prominent, he ended up, I'm not going to say what happened. He's fine. He's healthy. He's flourishing in the world today.
Right.
Coach's program saved his life
Sure.
because he could talk about it. He could be around. He didn't have to say, we got to go see the shrink. This is a bunch of crap. It was, hey, these are my guys that are keeping me with it.
Yep.
They are the ones that help me uncover what's going on in my life and why I'm here. I think, and on that day, Mark, I said, this is my program because I could stand up and say, this kid needs help now.
Yeah.
Like, stop everybody else doing.
Yeah.
They talked about it within the team. They worked on how to reintegrate him back into the team. It wasn't marginalized at all. And people see Coach Saban ranting on the sidelines, and they don't see this side.
Yeah.
That ranting on the sidelines, y'all, is a piece of the iceberg. You don't see him ranting to a kid who can't handle it, by the way.
Right.
Who's not prepared for it.
That's right.
He is prepared. He is tailored, and he's structured. If the best coach in college football history, in my opinion, and probably football, and Coach Burtman, my coach, said he's the best coach to ever coach a sport in any career we've ever been in. He said, if he's willing to look at the mental side this way, why can't every principal, every high school coach, and as a result, I've been doing a lot of stuff with suicide. I don't say prevention, but suicide warning signs with coaches at every level. Yeah. High school coaches, it's coming. You're gonna have one day where a kid comes to you. Strength coaches, it's coming. Yeah. Athletic trainers, it's coming. You will have somebody who pulls you to the side and makes a comment. Mm.
You remind me of something. One of the things Tyler used to love to do, and if you know Tyler, he didn't spend a lot of time talking about himself, but so I would get these calls, and the calls would start like, "Hey, what you doing?" And I, oh, okay, he wants to talk. So wherever I'm at, I stop and I can't wait to hear these because he's always this joy just bouncing out of him. And the ones that stick out, some of the ones that stick out the most are with his strength and conditioning coach.
Mm.
And he'll call me, and this is a quarterback. They didn't talk about throwing, they didn't talk about drops, they didn't talk about coverages. They talked about life, they talked about each other, they talked about being early and leaving late, those kind of things as a way of life, not as a catchphrase or a Twitter post. And he would call and tell me that, and I never felt happier listening to my son tell me about anything. And so
Yeah.
I got a couple of those, and those stand out. And when I spoke to the trainer who's now with the Bears, um, I could tell why. He was just one of those guys, and it's so not enough to tell them. And every chance we get to talk to the staff, particularly the coaching staff and the football coaching staff, we share with them, like, you're changing men's lives in football by what you do every day. And whether it's, if you're not coaching it, you're letting it happen. Pick one. But the reality is, you're going to have this opportunity to step in and do the right thing. And the culture, we throw that word around a lot. The culture that you just described, when you had to sit a starter or a potential starter or somebody
Hmm.
contributing, and the feedback you got, that, like, you want to turn that into a PSA, because that's culture. I don't. It doesn't have to have a slogan. It's, I feel I'm going to take care of these guys. We don't commit cancer. We don't commit suicide. What we do is we deal with the disease processes that attack us, and mental and physical shouldn't matter. And so it's encouraging there. Do you remember Dr. Michael Gervais?
Oh yes.
Okay. So I'm gonna I hope he won't mind. I'm gonna butcher what he sort of said, but the gist was, he said, when I was up at this with Coach Carroll at the Seahawks, if you hung a shingle, it reminds me of the story you're alluding to. If you hang the shingle that says, psych, or whatever, a mental
Hmm.
health counselor, whatever you want, you're going to get nobody in to see. If they do, they're going to joke and stuff. You put performance on it, and now you have
Yep.
people that show up and say, I just can't catch the flu. I can't catch anything, doc. And his in a much more eloquent way, he said, Mark, there were all the things that were wrong. The majority of things had nothing to do with football. And
Correct.
and when you peel that onion back and you start letting people heal themselves and get the help if they need it, or just the encouragement if they need something else, that turns that individual into the most positively performing athlete in the case we're talking about, and is the best for you. So I look at it as Coach Saban and others that follow this model. And we're so lucky to be up at Northwestern, and Coach Fitz and Coach Jake have the same thing. This is a family kind of thing.
Yeah.
But when you see those guys that are successful, that get through this, I'm going to tell you, they're getting the best performance out of their kids and taking care of them. And in fact, they go together, right? And so, is it the only reason coach is successful? Not at all. But it doesn't surprise me at all, and it heartens me to, it lifts me up to see when those guys can incorporate the very very best practices, in taking care of our kids and winning at the same time. And I think that's such a tremendous story, because you don't want anyone to ever think, well, I got your mental health day. Hey, listen, I heard hamstring for 25 years. You can't, everybody has a hamstring. Well, is that the same as a mental health day for some of those guys? But the conversation, it shouldn't change. Nobody should feel differently. And we talked about this at the very beginning. I hear a lot, wow, he had such courage to do this and that. And that is true, right? Dak Prescott, you can go down kind of
Yeah.
a list of the guys. I just hope in my lifetime we see that as not courageous. That's just part of the environment that they're in, and they feel good about all of that because people care about them as a person, and football is one of the things they do.
That's so well said. And, it's coaches, administrators who are listening to this. It's not It's not if, it's when that phone call is going to come. That somebody's going to be in your shop, in your building, in your locker room at 4:45,
Yeah,
and it's just the two of you, and a statement is made, and the hair on the back of your neck rises,
yeah,
and you just need to be present with them.
that's it.
You don't have to solve it. It's the same as using physical, if somebody's there puking
Yeah.
because they've eaten a bad oyster,
Yeah.
you don't need to solve the fact and say, you ate a bad oyster. See, this is what you get. You support them through the vomit.
Right.
You support them through the crisis before we try to diagnose why. Let's just support them through the emergency. It's gonna happen, y'all.
Absolutely.
And I work a lot with golf coaches. I've had golf coaches tell me, my 10 a.m. showed up one day, come in for a golf lesson. We close the door, we start working, and they just start crying.
Mm.
And the conversation started, and they just needed a person to talk to.
Yeah.
Strength and conditioning coaches, it will happen to you.
Yeah.
Many times players feel the most connection to you or the athletic trainer.
Or the trainers. Absolutely.
Yeah. The athletic trainers are the, I want to call them junior psychologists in the building. They're more powerful than that, but they are brilliant when it comes to mental health issues. And I think the more we can be, and as parents, many times we're the last to know because it's hard to have that conversation. So encourage them to talk, encourage them to have that conversation. There's a lot of stress in this world, and there's a lot of pressures on our young kids, pressures that we don't understand. It's not when we were in school. If you don't make a 35 or 36 on your ACT, you're not very smart anymore.
Right.
God, there wasn't anybody that smart in my schools.
Right.
So encourage them to know that life is a continuum and that suffering is a continuum too. And there's times that there's a choice that could be made too. There's a choice that could be made.
No, and I think, we, without repeating ourselves, I think there's these beautiful sort of comparative moments where you wouldn't expect people to solve a compound, fracture of the leg themselves. And you wouldn't expect diagnosable depression to just go away on its own. I think the thing that gets lost sometimes is we're so good at taking care of ACLs and ankles and shoulders, and we have such talent in the world that can do that. That what we're talking about is significantly more complex, and we understand less of it. We have probably the most dedicated. Everybody in this business that I've met, almost to a person, is in it because they care about people. They're not in it for any other reason. And so you have the very best working on a much more difficult problem. And I know I don't mean to trivialize it by ranking them, but we're working on this. We don't have all the information yet. We don't know. Tyler had stage 1 CTE. My wife likes to think, well, that was the gas on the fire. We don't know that. We've spent it. Believe me, we've read everything there is to read about it and continue. But it's very complex. And so if we give ourselves a little grace and a little patience and our very best at mentoring and coaching and leading can be tolerant of that and educate themselves, they're going to have the highest performing athletes and the most well-adjusted people on the planet. And what's going to happen there? They're going to play sports longer. They're going to be great assets to companies. They're going to be great husbands and fathers and so forth, all because we're changing that landscape and the way we think about our student athletes. I think, there's more important things, I suppose, but this is up there. We need to do it.
Yeah, this is way up there. This is way up there because, we are. I went to a grand rounds years ago at Emory, who had one of the top psychiatric residencies and departments in the country, and Dr. Charlie Nemiroff was the chair at the time, and a brilliant researcher and builder and everything. And he was giving a talk, and he said, when I go to internal medicine conferences, and they ask me to speak on mental health, I listen to them talk about how they treat diabetes or hypertension or other stuff. And they're talking about taking multiple medication or HIV. They're taking multiple medications together and they're pairing them together to get this super compound for somebody.
Okay.
And then we hear them, we hear them go out into, mental health, and they think, well, one drug should do it all. Like, this is a significantly more complex compound when we're talking about the greatest organ that we know the littlest about, the brain.
No.
And you manage emotions into it and all the other factors. We are on the cusp. We are on the very tip of the spear of this thing. Yeah. And we as administrators and people, listen, reach out. Hilinskis Hope is a phenomenal resource. Whatever age, size, whatever. If they can't do it, they'll get you in touch with somebody who can.
That's right.
We have got to have this conversation more commonly. There's somebody who may not hear you the first time. They will hear you the second time.
That's right. Well, I
Mark.
appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me. I think that it's it's a movement in a sense. There are many people in our position. We're grateful to the licensed mental health practitioners that support us, and welcome us into their schools and campuses and trust us with their kids. And so we're grateful for that opportunity, Doc. And being on your show today just reminds me of it. So thank you.
Well, thank you for sharing your story, and thank you for sharing pulling back a curtain on something that we all need to talk about. Listen, people, go to hilinskishope.org for more information. It's in the show notes. It's everywhere. Let's support them, but let's also support our young men and women in today's world for any support possible. Just shine a light, and if we shine a light, maybe we can show them through the crap they're going through internal that we may not even know. So let's not miss the next one. Not
Better to try to help somebody that doesn't need
please.
than to miss the one that does. Yes, sir.
Yes, and thank